Hello, everyone. I am Northern Westman, and you are watching the Disciple Hour, episode 13. I am joined by Gentile Gentleman and Ian. Say hello, fellas.
Hello, this is Ian.
Hey, good morning. This is Gentile.
And today we will be discussing spiritual contracts and whether Christians are allowed to fight. Very interesting. So let me kick it off. I have a few notes regarding spiritual contracts. Number one, can you make spiritual contracts willingly or unwillingly? Number two, do people like the Freemasons accidentally sell their souls when they make spiritual contracts? Three, are we making a spiritual contract when we choose to fight? Four, if we choose to fight in our own might, are we not declaring that we don't trust God? Number five, we have been fighting for centuries, and yet Satan only gets stronger. Are we doing things wrong? So, those are my 5 points. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's first talk about spiritual contracts and whether you can make them willingly or unwillingly. This topic actually frightened me a bit after I studied the Freemasons. Now, of course, these are theories. We don't really know what takes place within the Freemasonic Lodge, but from what I've gathered, I am told that they make these strange rituals and they are totally secretive. And every lodge you climb up, you do new rituals. And there's like this very creepy ceremony or ritual regarding dying spiritually. It's like the satanic version of the baptism. In Christianity, we are baptized underwater, we die, the old man dies, and we are born anew in Christ. So let me tell you about this spiritual contract in the Freemasonic order. Again, it's a theory, but this is what I'm told. So the ritual is there's like a coffin on the floor, and Freemasons form a circle around it. And the initiation member is supposed to step over the coffin 3 times in a specific pattern, forming a triangle or something, like a pyramid. And this symbolizes that they are dying their old man and are reborn or something. And so it's like, why would they even do this? If this is true, that is. And it really spooked me out because I'm of the opinion that the Freemasonic order is satanic at the very top. New members, they have to be they have to believe in a higher power. That's a requirement for becoming a member, a brother in this brotherhood. And so, are these newbies, are they accidentally selling their souls to the devil? I mean, what kind of strange rituals do they make? And at what time, at what lodge do they even realize that they have been tricked by the devil? Have they accidentally blasphemed against the Holy Spirit or something like that? I don't know. That's what got me thinking about spiritual contracts. And just remember that Satan has dominion over this fallen world. And so we should not play by his rules. And it's very interesting that Jesus walked on the water. Just as God's spirit, he hovered over the waters in Genesis. And so God is not playing by the law of the sea, but by the law of the land. Jesus walked on the water. to like have dominion over the chaos and the waters. And this got me thinking about spiritual contracts. Do you have any comments on this, fellas? It's a bit broad, I know.
No, I think it brings up some very interesting points, and I think it is true that we can both willingly and unwillingly enter into spiritual contracts. I think a lot of people kind of underestimate their daily choices. Um,
Mhm.
we all have a contract with God, whether we like it or not. We are God's children. And just like your children have a contract with you, you have responsibilities as a parent. You teach them, you instill in them a sense of duty, a sense of culture, a sense of, these things. And their portion of the contract is to grow up and to work hard and to, you know, stand by that, and continue that tradition on and to, be not only productive, but, godly and healthy children and turn into healthy people. And God expects the same from us. He created us, and therefore He gets to, design the spiritual contract between us and Him. So we are supposed to follow His law. We're supposed to work hard. We are supposed to, praise His name, and spread His word and be an example to others. And so that contract we all have, whether we like it or not. And we basically decide whether or not we violate it. Um, as far as contracts with Satan, bringing up the Freemasons, the Freemasons are very interesting because when you get high enough, what I've read and heard, and most of the things that I've researched is they always ask you every time you go up a level, these, scripted, little chants. And at the very end, you're supposed to say that you seek the light. The light is what they're seeking. And supposedly, when you reach the highest level, you realize that the light is the angel of light, Satan, and that's what you're seeking. It's kind of told to you at the very end, that's what you're truly seeking. So they are satanic outright in the sense that they do recognize and they do believe, and they accept Satan as the god of this world, and he's who they're making their bargain with. And most Freemasons never rise up to that level. It's actually very difficult to rise in Freemason levels. It's not just about being there a certain length of time or like Scientology, where you simply donate a certain amount of money. You really have to, one, be useful to the organization and be a certain level, of society, somewhere in the upper class and somehow positioned to be useful, or at least part of a family that's already been, within the organization, just like Skull and Bones. If you have family that's already in the organization, you kind of get fast tracked, but that's because your family is expected to raise you to be prepared to enter. Um, so it's not something that most Freemasons are even aware of. Many Freemasons are kind of like pawns. They probably know something is up, but they really don't know all the intricacies. And they're really, expected as members to, present to the public that nothing is going on. And they're told that nothing is going on. Many of the members are kind of just, the bottom of the pyramid, just Ponzi's. And they really don't have, the understanding of what they're actually a part of. So they definitely are making a spiritual contract in that sense, because many of them down on the ground level, it's not like they can't do the research themselves. It's not like they can't see. And it's also not like they don't get to the Freemason Bible. If you've ever seen the Freemason Bible, the first several pages are all the Egyptian gods and tons of other, pagan gods, and how, the Egyptian gods were really transformed into what we now see as Christianity. They talk about Set being Jesus before Jesus, and all this other stuff. So there's these multiple layers, to what they do. And their so-called Bible is not a Christian Bible at all. So these guys on the ground level know they're not part of a Christian organization, and they choose to participate anyway. So they are making that spiritual contract, whether they realize it or not, but they should be realizing it. Just like how you and me, when we decide to walk away from God, we're violating that spiritual contract. And if we intentionally decide to be one of these militant atheists, who just challenge or undercut the belief in God for other people. Now we're making a very dangerous spiritual contract, so there's different levels of the spiritual contract for sure, and worse ones that you can make. Absolutely. Ian, you have anything to say on the Freemasons?
I mean, a lot of what I would say was stuff that you said. I mean, admittedly, I'm not involved with that organization, so I can't say, but a lot of what you said is similar to what I've heard. That I mean, I know that years back there was this guy who went to our church who apparently was involved with them, and my father said that he was trying to get him to, he was trying to recruit him for it, and he said to the guy, "Well, come on, they worship Satan." He's like, "Well, only at the highest levels." So, I mean, I guess even some of the lower level people know what's going on, but for them, they kind of rationalize it by saying it's just a fraternal organization. And I mean, I don't know if this is a tangent you'd want to go on, but I mean, I know that, in the old days, fraternal organizations were very common because they allowed men to come together, they allowed men to organize and, uh, accomplish things as a team. And so fraternal organizations are a very useful thing, but I guess, obviously as Christians, we should condemn any fraternal order which has a spiritual element that supersedes Christ, um, such as ones where they're seeking the light, as you say. But I mean, I know that there are some. I'm pretty sure the Catholic Church actually does forbid its members from joining fraternal organizations like the Freemasons, because I guess they realize that it's wrong. And I know that I'm pretty sure that's why the Knights of Columbus was founded. It's supposed to be a fraternal organization for Catholics, and so I mean, I can understand the desire for fraternity, for having an organization of men who come together and try to achieve things. And I guess in some ways it has a good it has a benevolent veneer on it, because I know that there are, along with the Freemasons, there are other groups like the Shriners who are affiliated with them and who do a lot of charity work and stuff. So I mean, but I mean, it could be similar to like the way a lot of mafia people, they make their money killing, but then they fund all these charities just to maintain this air of, or this image of respectability. But yeah, I mean, I think it is easy to get led astray by some of these things. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that was just some thoughts I had.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you both.
Yeah, absolutely right. It is interesting how many fraternal orders the Catholic Church has. They even have the Fraternal Order of the Knights of Malta, which is what the Knights Hospitallers, used to be. It's their current incarnation. I really wish that, for lack of a better term, like Protestant Christians had more of those kinds of things. I know there's a big one in the United States, but it's kind of just like this big, clunky, not very religious kind of fraternal order. But yeah, those would definitely be something cool to bring back.
Well, I don't know if I would ever join a secret society, but like fraternity, like a guild or something, sure. But not like some secret society with strange rituals. Never.
Yeah, no, we'll open up the Beaver Lodge, and everybody gets a beaver top hat, and we'll business plan and podcast, and do all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, like on the Flintstones, Fred and Barney were members of the Water Buffaloes and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, the bowling team. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
they had the funny hats. Yep, totally.
All right.
I'm telling you, you can do it right. So you can make the good spiritual contract.
Right. But a little more on spiritual contracts, like, things that look harmless, like Halloween. Halloween is just, this is a satanic celebration. Like children dressing up as dead zombies or ghosts or demons. Like this has, if you just think about it, like, I think the main rule is this: would God approve? Yes or no? If you are dressing up as a skeleton and decorating your house with ghosts and spookiness and demons, Like, would God approve? Are you welcoming God, or are you welcoming unclean spirits? It's pretty clear it's the latter, right? And so I detest Halloween. I detest it. I don't want Halloween, quote unquote, celebrations in my neighborhood or anything. And I wish that more Christians realize that they are making spiritual contracts unwillingly.
Well, what about Halloween? If you're dressing up as like a fireman or something like that, just sort of a
I mean
benign
that
thing like that.
yeah, that's
I mean,
pretty
would that be
harmless, like a fireman LARP, but
yeah?
Well,
but
the thing that's important when we look into holidays, Christians really have this bad habit of being kind of in sort of intellectually passe, and we do have this bad habit of justifying things. And I think this is where we get a lot of these, like, homosexual pastors and female pastors and all this stuff now, is we've become so passe about standards, that people are just willing to accept most anything. And when you call something a holiday, like, that literally means holy day. You change the I to a Y and it's holy day.
Mhm.
There's a reason, the root of that word is holy day. It has a religious context. Holidays are supposed to be religious. This
Mm.
is why so many Americans were so upset when they made Martin Luther King Day a holiday,
Ah.
because what they're basically saying is that Martin Luther King is now a saint. When you make something a holiday, especially back in the 50s and 60s, when people were a bit more, intellectually kind of geared towards seeing things this way. And a lot of Americans actually didn't even like President's Day when they first did it. A lot of them saw it as something that the founders wouldn't have liked, because you're kind of deifying them. And I think there is a little bit of truth to that. Holidays are meant to specifically be holy days. Like, these are a religious or some other type of extremely important day. Otherwise you'd call it a celebration. Thanksgiving didn't used to be a holiday. It was always Thanksgiving celebrations, and you could do them throughout the year. George Washington called for multiple days of Thanksgiving during his presidency. It wasn't necessarily a holy day. It was just something
Mm.
that the country would call for every once in a while. Whenever they had a great victory, or whenever the country was doing well, a president would give a speech somewhere and say, let's have a day of Thanksgiving, and the nation would all come together and do it. Abraham Lincoln, kind of instituted it, but there were calls for days of Thanksgiving hundreds of times before Abraham Lincoln instituted it as like an official holiday. So we do have to kind of think of things in this context. And so when we say that Halloween is a holiday, what we're saying is that it is somehow holy and that it is somehow religious. And we have to remember where it comes from, especially, being Scottish myself and knowing a lot about Celtic history. It comes from the holiday of Samhain, which is kind of All Hallows Eve. And what they would do is, this is the day that they thought that the dead and the demons and all of the evil spirits came out. And if you didn't, decorate your home and leave out lights all night and leave offerings on your doorstep, that they would curse you. And people in the neighborhood, if they noticed that you weren't participating, they would come and they would damage your house. They would light your house on fire, or they would do all these other things. So the modern day, American, I don't know how many people in Europe do this, but the modern American practice of trick or treat, you go to someone's house, you knock on their door and they don't give you candy. You're supposed to throw toilet paper or eggs or things at their house. This is all just a continuation of that tradition that, oh, you don't participate in this holy day, so um you get attacked. And in no way, even if you say, oh, well, I don't throw eggs at people if they don't give me the candy, I just move on to the next door. And it's like, sure, you can always take something evil and make it less evil, but that doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it godly. And as Christians, I do think we really have to have that mentality, like, hey, is this godly? Or am I behaving in a way, or am I rationalizing? And we have to be so careful of that, because rationalization has really gotten us to a bad place in the present day. And I think we can all see that.
Amen. Amen to that. So I think this is a good time to change the subject slightly and talk about fighting. unless you have anything else to add to spiritual contracts in general.
I just wanted to add one more thing about spiritual
Sure.
contracts. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has a section where he talks about oaths, and from the NIV, I'll read. It says, "Again, you have heard it that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." So I think it's
Wow.
interesting that he's saying not to take oaths, but to simply live an honest life. So maybe that's something to consider when we think about some of these secular, spiritual contracts.
This is mind-blowing. I never really got that verse until now. So I remember there was this thing here in Iceland where like a new constitution was written. It hasn't been accepted, thankfully, because it's just a wish list. And it's basically the most anti-white trash. It's just, you can wipe your ass with it. But the idea was, this shows you the just the double standard of these people we are up against. They are against oaths altogether. They will not swear an oath of allegiance to our country or folk. However, they wanted all congressmen or members of parliament, as they're called here, to swear an oath to uphold this new BS constitution. And I remember thinking, I had the honor to, even back then, I mean, I still do, but I had the honor to never violate an oath. But I remember thinking, like, how evil this is to use someone's honor, and especially our people, Western kind. We are an honorable people. It's very sick and evil to use our honor against us. And our people have, been made to swear oaths to, go and kill their brothers in a different country, just the neighboring country in Europe. And in America as well, the Union versus the Confederates. And now I'm kind of having a revelation that perhaps oaths are just all wrong altogether. This has indeed been the instrument of the enemy for a long, long time, to make people swear oaths only to serve Satan. So yeah, I was just a bit blown away.
Yeah, and I mean, when you for government officials in the United States, they have to take a pledge to defend the U.S. Constitution. Although, of course, that's just, we all know how much that really means to people who don't connect with it biospiritually. But regardless, I mean, yeah, oaths can also be used to, like you're saying, they can be used to sort of trap you into doing things that really aren't good. And where was I going with this? But like, yeah, I mean, it does kind of, if you're trying to protect the Constitution, it binds you to a document rather than the good of your own people. It's like putting law ahead of people, which I guess in some cases could be good, but in other cases can definitely be bad. So it's almost like a devil's bargain there.
Yeah,
Well, and it's also, it's an interesting thought because of, we really take for granted how many places, where we swear oaths. Even if you just go to court, let's say you get subpoenaed to go to court to be a witness, you have to be under oath to testify, right? And then, how far does that go? Because let's say you sign a contract, You buy a house and you sign a contract to pay it off. Is that the same as an oath? I would think not, in the sense that a contract has a very specific set of parameters. It has a time limit. It has a determined amount, right? Like, all you're doing is like, hey, we agree on this, and it's a record of agreement, and you're fulfilling a contract, and then the contract doesn't exist anymore. Whereas an oath, like you guys bring up, like, say you take the soldier's oath, where you swear to defend the Constitution, you swear to, answer the call, and all of these other things. It's like, yeah, but what if your country, tells you have to go do something evil? So yeah, that does bring up very interesting, ethical, and spiritual dilemma there, because it's like, is your allegiance to God and to doing the right thing first, or is it to this institution you've taken an oath to? And I think that is very interesting, because at least in the American military, they have a set of standards for illegal orders. If you take the oath of being a soldier and then you get an order from a superior that you deem to be unethical, you can choose not to follow it. And then at a later point, someone will deliberate it in court and decide whether or not you made the right decision. But I don't know if all militaries allow for that. I believe most of them probably don't. So yeah, that does bring up very interesting things. I think if you ever are to swear allegiance to something, the only way to possibly make it right is to include some kind of portion of it where you declare that God and his way will always come first, or that this oath is on the premise that we will act according to God's will, something along those lines, to show that you actually put God first. But even then, Jesus, maybe he warned against it, because there really is no way of doing that. That's an extremely interesting verse.
Yeah, before I forget, I need to interject. Have you seen the footage of George Bush Sr. pretending to place his hand on the Bible at the initiation? What do you call it? The initiation ceremony?
Inauguration.
Inauguration ceremony, yeah. But he actually places his hand on the Masonic Bible on top of the Holy Bible.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were quite a few U.S. presidents who were sworn in that way, sadly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, because if you go back, especially a lot of the modern ones where we have pictures, and stuff of them actually swearing in, there's always multiple books in that person's hand. So yeah, it really, and that opens up a whole nother can of worms. I don't want to get too far away from our topic of spiritual contracts, and especially
Sure.
not talking about, Christians being able to participate either in warfare, and what is acceptable versus unacceptable violence. I
Mhm.
think that's an important topic we want to talk about. But even, I'll just make the side note that most modern day oaths have been so watered down. Even the Hippocratic oath that doctors take,
Mm.
doctors are allowed to make up their own Hippocratic oath now,
Wow.
where just you get to make up your own oath, whatever you decide for it to be. Because the original Hippocratic oath, as written by Hippocrates, actually said you couldn't cause abortions. And that there were certain other things that you're not allowed to do, such as untested treatments or unverified theories and things like that. You are not allowed to practice them until they are properly verified. And so they took those out of the Hippocratic Oath for doctors, decades and decades ago. So doctors have been swearing by an altered Hippocratic Oath for decades. And now, in the last, 20 years, they basically get to write their own Hippocratic Oath. So they just get to make it up. Their oath could literally be anything at this point. So there is no standard for the oaths either, or respect for tradition anymore. So it's very interesting. It's affected all levels of society. But we can totally get back on topic.
Yeah, that is not surprising. I replied, "Wow," but still surprised, but not surprised. But anyway, uh, yeah, let's discuss fighting. So that was the note I made. Are we making a spiritual contract with some principality or the devil when we choose to quote unquote fight? And by that I mean, inflicting violence on someone else. So another question then: should we quote demand rights end quote instead of, quote, fight for rights, end quote? Or should we, quote, proclaim our rights in Jesus' name, end quote? Now, I know that I'm getting into uh, almost, I'm not going to say new age stuff where you know, speak things out and speak things into the world or something like that. But I do think that our words have a significant meaning in the spiritual world because, you know, God, he created the world with the word. The word is really mystical. And I'm not going to get into some gnostics here, but it is my belief, and this is not strictly biblical, but I do think that words can have significant consequences. You know, it really matters how you frame things. And this goes, you know, I'm just going to quickly say, remember when Satan was tempting Jesus? This is in the Gospel of Matthew. He, you know, at the end, he brought Jesus either up on a mountain or up to the temple. I can't remember, the temple, I think it was. And he said, no, at the very end, he brought him up to a mountain and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world. And he said, you know, I'll give all of this to you, but only if you bow to me. And Jesus replied, "Begone, Satan." He could have said a lot of other things like no or something like that. He didn't answer the question. He just said, "Begone, Satan." And, you know, I might be over analyzing it, but I think there's a reason for why he said it. He's not answering his question, he's not partaking in his game. He's just telling him to piss off. Begone, Satan. He doesn't answer his question. But yeah, and this was kind of a detour, but still, you know, your words, they have meaning, they have consequences. So does it have any meaning at all to proclaim your rights in Jesus' name or demand rights instead of fighting for your rights? And here I'm talking about fighting, not necessarily physically with, you know, violence. Just, do you fight for your rights or demand your rights or proclaim your rights? Any thoughts on this? Because if you fight, are you not stepping into Satan's dominion?
Well, I think of those options you presented, proclaiming rights is probably the most Christian way in my initial impression of it. I mean, I think to proclaim rights suggests that you're just saying, look, this is my right, this is what I'm doing. It's just sort of taking action and not, you know, using violence or anything. I mean, I think there's also the discussion of what constitutes a right. I mean, like some people will say like you know, I guess for example in the United States there's a lot of people who want a more socialized healthcare system than what we have, and the way they frame it is they say healthcare is a human right. It's like, well, you're proclaiming a human right that involves other people's time, effort, and resources. So that's kind of a, you know, what happens when there aren't enough people who can perform the surgery you need, or there isn't enough money or medicine to give you the treatment you need. I mean, are you being denied your rights, quote unquote? I mean, that's just kind of a silly framing. But when people just use this rhetorical framing where it's a quote human right, then it's like, how do you counter that without sounding like a bad guy? I mean, and to go back to what you were saying about words having power, I mean, yeah, we know words have power because words shape the way we think about things. So people who understand how to manipulate language in a persuasive way are very powerful. So,
Yes.
I mean, I think when it comes to rights, you know, the only thing you can really proclaim as being a right is something that, you know, honors your humanity. I mean, if I say I have the right to self-defense, I think that's valid because, like, I don't think there's anything that says that I have a moral duty to just allow myself to be murdered or someone I love to be murdered, or you could say that's an actual right that's just independent of anybody granting it to you. Um, but but like there's some rights such as the right to. I mean, there's some rights that can be curtailed by laws like free speech or you know freedom of self-defense. But I mean, like as far as rights which are moral, with the ability to speak one's mind, the ability to or the right to speak one's mind or the right to act on one's conscience. I mean, I think those are more fundamental. So I guess when you're talking about proclaiming rights, it depends on whether the right is something you can actually morally justly proclaim.
Yeah, this is it's a multi-layered, question for me. And I think my answers are probably going to differ from you guys in certain ways. I think naturally, Americans and Europeans think of rights differently. Um, European culture, especially, in the more recent times, the more older European ideals were much more in line with America's original ones versus now. And unfortunately, I think the European culture has changed to a very clerical culture where your rights are basically whatever the government says they are. If it's written down on a piece of paper, you could do it, but as soon as someone erases it, you can't do it anymore. Type of thing, which is unfortunate. It's caused a lot of chaos over there as rights and laws can change so quickly. Um, but as an American, the way that I've always understood rights, I was always taught to think about rights is that you can't claim something as a right unless it is something that all living people can claim as a right and that it is given from God, which is why the Bill of Rights, in our Constitution is so short. They didn't add the right to food because if you have a right to food and you don't procure or grow your own food, that means you have a right to steal someone else's food. So that can't be a right. You can't have a right to, things. Same thing with like housing. Like, oh, I have a right to live in a house. Okay, but what if you don't do anything to acquire a home? Oh, well, then I get to live in your house because it's a right. It allows you to steal. So you can't ever say that something is a right that allows you to steal or allows you to harm someone else. Such as abortion. People try to say abortion is a right. And it's like, no, it's absolutely not a right. Like, what are you talking about? You have to go and ask someone else to do it for you. And even if you somehow found a way to do it to yourself, you're still taking someone else's life. You're stealing life. You're causing harm to someone. So something that causes harm to someone can't be a human right. And this is why they enumerated very simple things. People have the right to bear arms. It doesn't say you have a right to firearms. Otherwise, the government would have to issue you one. Because then you could go to the government and say, hey, the Constitution says I have the right to have a gun, so you have to give it to me. No, it says you have the right to bear it. If you go and acquire one, you can bear it. No one can tell you you're not allowed to have one. But that doesn't mean someone has to give it to you. They worded it perfectly. And they deliberated it, dozens of men for hours on exactly how it should be worded. And they worded it that way specifically. And then some of the other rights, like freedom of speech, you do have freedom of speech. But I like the right for freedom of speech because it opens up this question. And this is the thing that no one likes to talk about when they talk about rights, is that you have responsibility when you have rights. What freedom of speech basically means is the government cannot tell you that you're not allowed to say something. So if I want to go out in the street and say, I think the government's ripping us off, these taxes are bad, the government can't just come jail you for that. That's freedom of speech. But if I walk up to another individual on the street and I say, hey, you're a effing B word punk, this and that, that person's probably going to punch me in the face because you have a responsibility. to use your speech appropriately. If you go and you just insult someone, sure, the government can't jail you for that, so you still have freedom of speech, but that does not mean that someone is going to put up with you being, a scumbag. There are layers to that. And this is kind of another part of modern culture that I don't like. These days, someone comes up to you and they get all up in your face and they say something to you and you punch them in the face, you can go to jail for that. And I don't think you should. I think if you're walking down the street with your wife and some guy walks by and makes a sexual comment about her, you not only should be able to smack him in the mouth, but you have a duty to kind of smack him in the mouth. And that also comes with, other kind of biblical caveats too, right? Jesus says to turn the other cheek. But he said this in the sense that if someone insults you, we have to remember that in ancient times, if someone wanted to insult you, they would slap you across the cheek. Or if someone challenged you to a duel, let's say, they'd throw down the gauntlet. They would slap you with a glove and drop it on the ground. And if you picked the gauntlet up, then the duel was on. And so when Jesus says turn the other cheek, I always saw that as something personal. Like if someone comes up to me in the street and like, hey man, you're an a-hole. And I'm just like, oh, okay, whatever, you're weird. And I'll just walk away, because someone calling me an a-hole isn't enough for me to really get that riled up. Right. But when you are faced with a situation such as what we see, through videos and in person all the time, sometimes, especially Western kind in the modern day, we are approached, by other people, non-Westerners sometimes, who are hell-bent on victimizing us, on attacking us unprovoked. We see these videos of old ladies getting shoved off buses, to the ground and being critically injured or being thrown into a train, or a woman or a lone man walking along the street and someone comes up behind them and plays the knockout game and just sucker punches them from the side and runs off. There are people that are hell-bent on simply victimizing you. And those people, you have a right to defend yourself against. You don't turn the other cheek to, direct victimization. You turn the other cheek to things that are superficial, right? If someone just calls you a name, you can give a soft answer and turn away wrath. But if someone comes up to you, and they brandish a knife or they brandish a weapon, or if you make it clear and obvious that they're going to attack you, that's not the time Jesus means that you turn the other cheek, because that person has basically on an individual level declared war on you. And this is really where we kind of get into the soldier's dilemma. Do soldiers murder when they're fighting one combatant to another? The declaration of war versus murdering someone to rob them or to steal their stuff, or you're jealous that this man married this woman and you think that if you kill him, maybe she'll marry you next. Those are very different sets of circumstances, and they're important circumstances. They're not semantics. When two people decide like, no, this is war, or if someone declares war on you on an individual level in the street, you do have the ability to fight back, just like a nation has the ability to fight back. There are times all throughout the Bible where God even instructed, Israel and people to make war at certain times. I really think it depends what you're fighting for, whether or not you are the aggressor, and whether or not you put your faith in God that, hey, if it is his will, we will fight and we will win. If it is not his will and we're in the wrong, we're going to lose. When you have that mentality and you go to war, that is a higher level than just, well, my country says we got to go to war. Those Brits are over here, or these Germans are over here. We gotta go. Like, how dare they? That's a very different, spiritual level, of accepting your responsibility there. And so, yeah, so it definitely brings things up. And like Ian said, what if someone, threatens your wife, threatens your family, or if you witness someone being threatened, does God expect you to stand by and watch, or even worse, record it with your cell phone? I would hope not. Right? No, and especially as men, women are the guardians of children. If a woman witnesses someone doing something wrong to a child, she has a moral duty to stand up for that child, whether it's hers or not, but especially if it's her own, right? Whereas men, we have a responsibility really to everyone. And a lot of men really don't like having to face up to this responsibility. If you see a small little guy, he's 150 pounds, he's an adult, but he's got glasses, he's not a physical guy. And you see some, linebacker Chad start throwing his weight around and picking on this kid, in public, and embarrassing him in front of his girlfriend or his family, and just ragging on him because he knows he has no ability to defend himself. You as a person are supposed to go and try to diffuse that situation, not allow that kind of blatant victimization to happen. And a lot of men abdicate that responsibility, which emboldens other men to act that way because they know no one's going to step in, no one's going to get involved. Everyone just wants to mind their own business, and they take advantage of that. I think men being too passive at a certain point allows a certain amount of evil. And whenever I do see those videos of Western kind being victimized, I always put in the comments, you know, why didn't someone do something? Why do we stand by and watch? Or why do they refuse to fight back? You see some of these videos where people will get smacked, whacked like 8, 10 times without answering a single, punch. And then they just keep getting attacked until they're completely unconscious. This refusal to fight, this refusal, to kind of accept that they have a responsibility at a certain point to stand up so that there will be less victims in the future. Every little kid in a playground will tell you as soon as someone stands up to the bully, he becomes a lot less likely to bully people. But as long as he bullies people and everyone watches and no one says anything, he's emboldened to bully even more people. So we have, these kind of social contracts as well as spiritual contracts. And that's, I mean, it's a really big, long rabbit hole that we could go down. But I think depending on what you're fighting for, and whether or not you accept that if it is God's will, that the nation should do this, then we should do it. But if we don't think it's God's will, we shouldn't.
Wow. Okay, you said a lot of things there.
Yeah,
I
sorry, I should
totally
I should have
agreed.
I
Yeah,
should have
yeah.
stopped there and let you guys jump in a little bit. I apologize.
No, wait. I can't really remember what you said at first. But it was like a bingo. Oh yeah, about the rights. Like they cannot be physical, and I fully agree. I mean, of course, like now in Iceland. Oh man, my nation is so fallen. It's like a the right to have sex. It's not official yet, but it's being discussed. It's being normalized. What that means is, like you said, I mean that basically means that you have the right to rape. Like, let's say that a guy is so unattractive or repulsive or whatever, repelling, that no woman wants to have sex with him, but he still has the right to have sex with women. Then he essentially has the right to rape them. Like, ugh, it's so sick and evil. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Rights cannot be physical. But yeah, I always struggle with this, God-given right stuff. But you kind of clarified it. Oh yeah, and one more thing, like the right to housing. Goodness, that's a thing here in Europe and probably in America as well. The right to housing. So basically, you have the right to order someone to build a house for you. That's basically what it means. But okay, I'm not going to dwell on that. You said so many other things. So okay, the fighting. Your last point was basically you are allowed to fight as long as it is God's will. But that opens up a can of worms as well. I mean, what? Yeah, when is it God's will to fight? Because I know that many Christians kind of become pacifistic. I have kind of become a pacifist in a way, but I've also heard that from Christians who are pacifistic that the time of fighting is simply not yet. Like once the tribulation starts, the fighting will become physical or something like that. I'm not sure. But I've really struggled with this, and like the people I um, associate with the most here. They are pacifists, but it's not like official. But you have to find it in your heart. Like, does the Holy Spirit um, is the Holy Spirit telling you to pick up a firearm? And I remember having conversations with these people like, but what about Constantinople? It fell, it was attacked, and they fought to the bitter end, and it fell. And everyone in Constantinople, every Greek was murdered. Every woman was raped and murdered. And I remember asking them, like, what about Constantinople? It was the capital of Christendom for centuries, for a millennium, for 1,000 years. Constantinople, today known as Istanbul, the biggest city in Turkey, was the capital of Christendom, and it fell to Muslim armies. Was it
Well, and
God's will? Yeah, was
we have to remember that was because they were so sinful. At that point, Constantinople was a shell of its former self.
really?
Yeah, towards the end there, especially after Emperor Justinian, his time, it had run its course of empire, and it had become a lot like ancient Rome towards the end, where there was prostitution in the capital, and all kinds of horrible stuff, really the kind of stuff that we see in the United States and Europe today, this
Mm,
decadence that came with success.
mm,
um and so I think that those types of things on a grand scale are divine providence. Constantinople was blessed as long as it was, that beacon for the
mm,
world, and it lived, accordingly, and it was Christian, and it did, profess those values. But as soon as it rotted from the inside, it was conquered. And that's the doom of every, great nation, which is why the Bible demands of us that, as a nation, when you read through Revelation and all these others, it says that if the nations were to drop to their knees and beg God's forgiveness and turn away from their evil ways, he would stay the punishments. But we aren't going to do that. We're such a stubborn,
mm,
humankind, that we refuse, to do that on a grand scale most of the time. And
mm,
so really, it's, again, when you win in battle, it's because God's allowing you to do so. Or when you lose in battle, it's because God's allowing you to
mhm,
lose. It's either punishment or reward.
mhm.
So you kind of should know ahead of time, are we the baddies or not? you know, when you're really being objective, you should know if you're fighting for the right side or not.
That's a good point. Yeah, I will say I'm not well versed enough in Byzantine history. But I didn't know that they were so sinful at their fall. I do know that like in the 1200s, so it fell in 1453 AD. I know that in the 1200s, the 13th century, they were actually attacked by Venice. And yeah, the Venetians, they no, I'm sorry. So no, sorry. The
Are you thinking the
Crusaders.
Phoenicians?
No, no,
PH?
no, no. The Crusaders, they were going to go on a crusade to Jerusalem, but they were bankrupt on the way. And so Venice actually kind of tricked them and told them to attack Constantinople.
Oh yeah, the Fourth Crusade. Yeah, the failed Fourth Crusade. They
Oh,
ended
yeah.
up sacking Constantinople and going
Yes.
home. I have a painting of it on my wall.
Oh, wow. And I remember, okay, it was the fourth one out of 9. Right. So, and it lasted 3 days. I remember that three days of humiliation, murders, and rape, nonstop rape for 3 days, and they looted the city. Yeah, and this really like demoralized Constantinople and the Byzantines.
Well, yeah, especially to be betrayed by Christians,
Yep.
and that's another. I mean, Crusades history is this whole other interesting point, because yeah, there were other times where they fell. 1527. the Holy Alliance, their lords abandoned a large group of their military in Italy, and they ended up kidnapping the Pope. And the 189 Swiss guards fought to the last man to protect him, but they ended up kidnapping the Pope and holding him for ransom.
Wow.
Without even accomplishing their crusade. So yeah, a lot of those later crusades turned quite bad. Really after the third crusade, into the Holy Land, at least, they all failed miserably. There was a lot of bad planning there towards the end, and that's what I mean. Is that when you're fighting for a good thing, you get rewarded. Retaking the Holy Land in the first and the second crusade, and Richard the Lionheart winning back the rights of pilgrimage to the Holy Land, or even Balder the Fourth, the Leper King, the King of Jerusalem, and his repelling of Saladin, just time after time. I mean, Islam's greatest commander could never beat Baldwin the Fourth, even though his forces were inferior, because Baldwin ruled the Holy Land in such a great way. He was this magnificent leader. I mean, someone who's truly forgotten in history. And this really does, come to that point. Why was he able to defeat these massively larger and more well-supplied forces of just slave armies that were thrown at him time and time again if it wasn't divine providence? So there are times to fight. When you are fighting, and you're on the right side, God will bless it. It's when you just take the opportunity to fight because you want to fight. You're a young, angry, testosterone fueled man, and you just want to hit that battlefield. It all depends on what you as a nation or as a group are fighting and doing it for.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to mention Alamo, the Battle of Alamo. What was it? 150 white guys against thousands of Mexicans, and they
Yeah.
fought to the last man. But they only lost because they finished their ammunition. And so I'm thinking, were they fighting? Did God bless them? I mean, see, were they only fighting in their own might? Were they really so formidable that they could take on an entire army just with 150 guys and I don't know how many rounds of ammo? But as soon as the ammo ran out, the Mexicans, I think they burned them inside. They fought with swords, but they eventually lost. I think they were burned, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe there were 7 survivors, if I'm getting the number correct. Obviously, there's a ton of Texans out there that can correct me. But I believe there were 7 survivors. One of them was Davy Crockett, and they were all shot by firing squad at the end, after they were taken prisoner. But no, the fort still stands. It was mostly a not concrete, but a type of concrete material fort, with bricks on the inside. So the fort still stands today. But yeah, no, they actually knew they were going to die. They fought anyway. The entire reason why they held out at the fort was so that Sam Houston could organize the Texas Army for a counteroffensive, and they needed more time. If they didn't stay and fight at the fort, they wouldn't have delayed the Mexican army long enough for him to rally the rest of the Texas Army. So they were actually the sacrificial lamb, and they knew that. So they had a chance to leave. They didn't. It's a very interesting story, but obviously a little bit different than the spiritual realm. But that's another, important thing to bring up. Like, what about the Battle of Waterloo? Where the British defeat Napoleon, or even during the American Revolution. It's so well documented that there were so many times that the American Revolutionary, army was going to be captured, and something supernatural happened. Like the Delaware River flooded, like the moment after the American military retreated beyond it. And because it flooded so fast and so deep in such a short period of time, the British couldn't give chase. And it allowed the American army to escape. And had that not happened, we would have lost the revolution that day. And there were other events in the American Revolution where these random, geological or supernatural things happened at the exact right moment when the Americans were losing. And it either caused them to win or it allowed them to escape. And there were dozens. I mean, just dozens of times where like these weird things happened at the right moment that never should have happened. And the British just had nothing but horrible luck in that war. They had more soldiers. They were better supplied. They had more money. They had more men. They had all of it. And this tiny little ragtag American, untrained, unhardened military was just constantly able to escape them, and just drive them mad, with all the bad luck that they were having. And so when you really look back on it, it can't just be all accidental. I really do think that there are, you know, definite examples of divine intervention in the courses of history to guide us towards everything that's been prophesied. And so as long as you're on that side, that is fighting for the good thing, or you're on the side that says, hey, my nation is about to go and fight something that they shouldn't fight, I'm not going to participate. As long as you're taking one of those stances, you're going to wind up on the right side. You just have to be able to decipher it. Like killing Gaddafi, our soldiers shouldn't have done that. Invading Iraq, our soldiers shouldn't have done that. Intervening in World War I, America definitely shouldn't have done that. We should have been working to broker a peace, right? There are tons of things we shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And ever since that time, directly after World War II, sure, America was greatly blessed because, we were the victors and we were able to carve the world up in a certain way. But that was really our downfall. We gave so much power to the communists and so much power to, and did a few other things we shouldn't have done that I won't say on the podcast because they're a little bit politically incorrect. But we did some things that we shouldn't have done that were definitely wrong, and we've paid the price for that. And now our nation is practically on its knees. So when you act according to God's way, you get blessings. But as soon as you turn away, you get cursed, and that's just a fact of history.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true. We've pretty much covered all of my points.
What do you think about military service as a Christian, Ian?
My view tends to be wars of aggression are not good. Wars of, unless you're actually defending your own physical safety, it's best not to engage in violence. Personally, I don't think any of the wars being fought nowadays are really like that. It's mostly just, different leaders, different rulers throwing their weight around for their own interests. So, I would never join the military because I don't see how it benefits me or my people in any way. That's probably not a terribly edgy thing to say at this point, but that's kind of how I look at it. But I mean, I do think it's legitimate to, take military action to defend your own home and defend your own family, if that's what is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I agree. Yeah, and when you look back at World War I and World War II, everyone's like, oh, but if we didn't get involved, the Germans would have conquered us. We'd all be speaking German. And it's like, you're telling me after fighting an entire war, and pretty much wearing itself completely thin, they were going to cross the Atlantic Ocean and take out America? Like, are you high? The kind of stuff that people try to say to get you into offensive wars is just laughable. But man, I don't know why, but it works. But no, I believe you're completely right. When you are defending, and and again with the American Revolution, right? They didn't invade England. They just defended themselves. Yeah, I think there is definitely that aspect to it too. That, yeah, when you are defending and when you're simply saying, hey, if anybody wants to mess with us, we're going to be ready for it, but we're not ever going to, attack anybody else unprovoked. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely, a great way to look at it. And yeah, Ian for president.
Amen.
May I not be corrupted by power.
Well, we all would be, right? That's something we would all have to be afraid of.
Yeah.
But see, you would potentially be corrupted. This is why you're the man for the job.
Well, thanks. It's been a good discussion.
This was a brilliant discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any final points? Any closing notes?
I'm still digesting everything.
Yeah, like I said, I apologize. My monologue was pretty long. I should have cut that into some pieces. I would go back and edit it if I could.
Nah, it's okay. It's a brilliant monologue.
Hey, we're podcasting. We're here to talk.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you got something to say? Say it.
That's true. Feeding my addictions. All right, well, take us away, Northern Westman.
You too. Take care, everyone. And everyone, thank you for watching. And God bless.